Hello, and welcome to the Center for the Future of Museums Digital Badging Project. I'm Elizabeth Merritt, founding director of the Center for the Future of Museums at the American Alliance of Museums, and I'm recording this short video to give you a glimpse of how I start my day with a bit of scanning for change. This is going to preview the various skills you're going to learn as you work through the assignments in this level. So without further ado, let me just close my web camera and I'm going to let you see my screen and what it looks like when I start the day with a little bit of coffee. Alright, so when I start my day, the first thing I do is open my browser to Google News. Now scanning, remember, is the process of looking for signals of change, keeping an eye on the world to find little bits of news that will give us hints about trends and events that maybe are shaping the world in the future. And the first thing we're going to decide is what sorts of things we're keeping an eye on. And you'll see over here a whole bunch of terms like future of museums, pilot payments, crowdsourcing, pop-up, augmented reality. These are all terms that I've chosen from my own personal scanning framework, and one of the things you will be doing in this level is creating your own framework of terms to guide your reading. So what I get here in Google News is some general top stories that it's pulling from the news that I may or may not be interested in, and then a bunch of stories in headers like the future of, where I've asked it to look for that phrase or buzzword as it does its searches. And sometimes you'll notice that these search terms we choose don't always return what we think they will. Like I wasn't looking for pop-up thunderstorms, I was looking for pop-up culture. But here's some stories on augmented reality, here's some studies on technology. So I'm going to go through this quickly and not spend all the time that I normally would, but you know, this looks interesting actually. I keep an eye on transportation because I really think that transportation and the transportation grid is going to affect not only our society, but how we design our cities and how people reach museums. So that particular article I think I'm going to open. And it's talking about how Tony Tse, which I'm probably mispronouncing, who's the founder of Zappos, so this guy knows how to run a business, is thinking about starting a car service, an electric car service in Detroit that would allow people to create a transit system based on a car share service and other kinds of public transportation. That's pretty interesting. So I want to find this again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to a bookmark from a service called Digo, and you're going to be setting up your own Digo account as one of your assignments, and I'm going to say transportation. I want to tag this article with this word so I can find it again. And I think I'm going to also tag it as urban planning because I see this as an issue that affects how people do urban planning. So I'm going to save that, and just to have a quick synopsis of this, I'm sorry, did I say Detroit earlier? I meant Vegas. So I'm going to just highlight this with the name of the project, and this is a synopsis of this, being about the bike and bus sharing service with a fleet of Teslas, which are electric cars. So I'm highlighting that so it's easy for me to skim and see when I bring it up again what I was looking at. Okay, so that was a pretty good story. That was what we call a scanning hit. An interesting story that gives me information about a trend, public transportation, shared cars, electric cars, that I might want to reference again. The next part of my scanning after I go through the news is I go over to my news aggregator. And I'm trying out NetVibes. You'll see up here. I used to use Google Reader, but it's going away in July, so I'm actually in the same process you will be in of trying out other aggregators. You're going to choose one that you will use to keep an eye on blogs or other news feeds, and you'll see that I've programmed this one to follow a couple, maybe 100 blogs, but I've been doing this for a while, that I think have interesting articles. And in the morning I will open it up and I'll see what's new today. I'm going to run you a little farther back in time to show you some of the things I've found. So I might look at this story from the Museum of the Future called Inspirational Female Future Leaders, and I just click on the headline and I say, what's that? And it gives me a little pop-up that shows me either all or some of the blog, depending on how it's configured. And it's a story on inspirational female future leaders in museum and culture that Jasper Visser collected and put on his Museum of the Future blog. And I think this looks pretty interesting. It's a list of people who he has had nominated, who have been nominated by his readers as being people to keep an eye on. And notice the other thing is a lot of these people are on social media. So all of these little @ phrases are their Twitter feeds. So this is a good set of recommendations maybe about who people might want to follow on Twitter to get interesting news. So I definitely want to bookmark this. So, oops, sorry. I'm going to open that in a new tab. And I'm going to copy the link. And I'm going to go over to my Twitter account because I think this is something people would want to know about. And I'm going to say inspirational future female leaders in the museum field. And then I'm putting in the address. And I'm going to credit Jasper so that he sees that I was citing his blog. And I'm going to send a tweet. So that's one way that I share my scanning hits with people who have chosen to follow the Future of Museums Twitter feed. And I might also send it over to Phil Katz and suggest that he feature it in our weekly e-newsletter, Dispatches from the Future of Museums, which is where we share a lot of our scanning hits. Okay, so back to my scanning. And I'm going to close that. So another article that I thought looked interesting is an article about how pop-up culture has been used to revitalize Greek cities during the recession. And so that one I might open and bookmark. I'm going to shortcut this process by not going into the details of that, but here's another example of something fitting my scanning profile, and I could open and bookmark it in Digo. Now, I also want to be able to find and share visual images, because sometimes that's very powerful. So here's a story from Arts Forward, which are our partners, MC Arts, in the Museum Innovation Lab project, and they're talking about the museum that won their recent Business Unusual Innovation Story Contest. And I'm opening that. I'm going to open that in a separate window, and here it is. Here's the full blog post, which has some cool images of object stories, which is the exhibit at the Portland Art Museum that won their contest. Well, one of the themes I'm following is storytelling, because that's the theme of the Alliance annual meeting this year. So I'm going to share this scanning hit, and because I think it's got a pretty cool visual, I'm going to do it by going to the Future of Museums Pinterest account, and this is another social media account that you might create in the course of doing your assignments for scanning. And I'm going to add what's called a pin, which means I'm going to link to that story by way of the image. So I'm going to look for the images that were contained in that blog post, and see, I already have my storytelling board selected. I have boards for all the different trends and themes that CFM is following. And again, this goes back to what I said about the scanning framework. These are terms that organize my thinking and scanning. And I'm going to say, it would help if I could spell, Portland Art Museum Object Stories Exhibit wins Arts Forward Business Unusual Award. So that's a little short explanation of why I pinned this image. And it creates what's called a pin, which is a copy of the image which links to the original story with my caption. And it's one of the images I collected in my storytelling board. And then I might go over to TweetDeck, which is a Twitter aggregation site where I can keep an eye on all the people I follow on Twitter and how they're interacting with me and places that they mention the future of museums. And I'll just use this to skim the recent Twitter activity. And oh, this looks like a cool post. Engagement is a two-way street. Awesome post by the Pop-Up Museum on the Arts Engaged blog salon today. I always like to see what the Pop-Up Museum is doing. So I'm going to click over there. And I'm going to skim this quickly because I don't want to keep you on the line too long. But it looks interesting. It's somebody who did a pop-up museum project documenting how it worked. I think that's something I'd like to share. So I'm going to go retweet that. So I'm sharing it with all my followers. And see, it showed up as something that I sent out. Oh, that's the last tweet I sent. Okay. Well, that gives you a basic idea of how this works. I get up and I spend a little bit of time every day doing a few minutes of scanning, maybe 15 minutes or half an hour, and then I'll try and find a few more minutes later in the day. And this is how I keep an eye on what's going on in the world, and this is what feeds me the information that I can then analyze and synthesize and turn into forecasts and scenarios. What you're going to do in this level is set up the various technological platforms that will support you doing scanning like this of your own.